Okay, let's play a game. You, the listener, and me. Right now. You start. 3, 2, 1, go. If you're paralyzed, not knowing what to do, it's normal. We hadn't set the rules yet. Petrified due to the infinite possibilities at your disposal. If you knew you had to pinch your left earlobe and whistle, you're a genius. But all us other mortals out there have just shown why we are, every single one of us, God. The Alpha and the Omega. Or, as the English philosopher, Alan Watts put it. Right now, you're God, playing you're not. The story Alan Watts tells is as follows. He pondered, what would you do if you were in control of your dreams? If you could dream the life of your choosing, every time you went to sleep. If you could condense 90 years of subjective time in 6 hours of sleep. He'd guess, you'd start by fulfilling all your wishes. If you are like me, family and friends, beautiful women, waterfalls of beer, art, peace, and beautiful women come to mind. After several years, living an orchestrated life every time you visit your pillow, you would abandon that hedonistic bent. And would awaken in you an appetite for adventure. To enter the labyrinth. Conquer the summit. Deserve the feast. In this game, being the author of your dreams, you could impose yourself more and more adversities, present yourself with increasingly dangerous conflicts to overcome, because you would know that you'd eventually wake up safely in your bed. More years would pass, and you'd end up bored of your nocturnal omniscience, of your trick dreams. You'd be tired of writing the script before acting on it. And you'd give yourself another proposition. To forget that you are dreaming every time you go to sleep. To abandon your powers. And be anxious every time the moon rises, and wake up every morning with the surprise of having survived the night before. And finally, one night, not knowing the adventure you're about to live. You dream of the life you're living now. Right now, listening to this podcast. At this very moment. It's not likely, but it's not impossible either. Because your life is one of an infinite multiplicity of existences to choose from. To play you are not God. Not the political God. With the muscles and beard and crown. But God-like, all that there is, and all that we do not know. You were trapped at first. Paralyzed by the infinite options at your disposal. Like our little game we played at the beginning of the podcast. Your existence is just the limits God decided to play in. The ways of discovering this great truth vary, but this is a constant in Eastern philosophy. In Zen Buddhism, they call it obtaining satori. When the wave discovers that it's the ocean. It's difficult to translate it for an audience of an Abrahamic tradition, whose concept of God is radically different. That supernatural, monarchical, almighty entity. In the West, you start exclaiming that you are God, and they crucify you, or they lock you in an asylum. In Japan, they would simply say, yeah, of course. Looks like you've obtained satori. But, making an effort, let us think. What does an all-powerful being lack? It lacks limits. So you're just one aspect of God, who completes it. If you're a Christian, you may scoff at me, saying, this issue was already solved by the Word of God made man, thank you. My intention is not to deny this. I'm not looking to please anyone either. I just want to entertain with you the listener, a reality that we seldom contemplate in the trenches of the day-to-day. Gutting it from any hint of theological sermon. Leaving the big metaphysical and ethical questions next to the glasses and the ashtrays. What I want to look into, facing the issue of voluntarily abandoning your powers being God, is in our hedonistic fantasies. In our obsession with safety and control. And, if it is precisely this obsession that diminishes our ability to obtain what we deeply and fundamentally all yearn for. The heroic. To be the heroes of our own story. Therefore, let us expand our resolution. And, to do that, first, let's review the initial meditation. So we'd satiate our immediate desires if we could design for ourselves our most ecstatic reality. As a model, I mentioned some carnal passions earlier. Maybe my aspirations seem banal to you, and they may well be. And yours might be a little more magnanimous. For example, curing cancer if you could. It's all the same to me. Is my impulse to make love to women who never age, any different from another's desire for world peace? Let's think about it carefully. Again, I'm not going to evaluate moral claims. Right now, the morality of these two aspirations. I just identify that the engine that animates both options is identical in both cases, regardless of the virtue we want to give them. Be it sensual intentions or humanitarian ones, their goals share the same hedonic desire of fulfilling a personal dream. Hedonism comes from the word hedone, which means pleasure, in a Greek dialect. And evaluative hedonism is a consequential, ethical doctrine. Ethics that gives primary importance to the consequences of actions, rather than their intentions. That believes that what's intrinsically good is pleasure, and what's bad is pain. There are many versions of hedonism, and none of them lack critics. Already during Plato's time, he said that hedonists live like oysters. I'm not quite sure what he meant with that, but. And the Victorian writer Thomas Carlyle assured that, according to hedonists, it would be better to be a well-kept pig than a person. Nietzsche, who we will talk of later, rejected the psychological motivations of hedonism by ensuring that man does not aspire for pleasure. Only the Englishman does that. This fame of decadence and debauchery is unwarranted. Not even the English utilitarians, who also advocated hedonism, deserve it. Hedonism tends to concern itself more with avoiding pain, rather than with the unfettered consummation of pleasure. Hedonism goes back farther than the Hellenistic era. But it was first consolidated with the Epicureans. Epicurus of Samos differentiated kinetic pleasure, the pleasure of satisfying a desire, such as scratching an itch, from katastematic pleasure, pleasure due to the absence of pain. And this latter one was the one that Epicurus prioritized. His goal was to achieve ataraxia. Ataraxia being a state of mind where one is free from all desire whatsoever, thus avoiding pain altogether. But, whichever one of those definitions of pleasure may be, the American philosopher, Robert Nozick, does not buy that pleasure should be the scale of our aspirations, nor of good and evil. And to illustrate this, he proposed a thought experiment called the experience machine. The experience machine is a modern version of the Hindu practice popularized by Alan Watts, and one of the best-known rebuttals of hedonism. Nozick's game is about the mutually exclusive choice between real daily life and a seemingly preferable virtual simulation. Let's see. Let us start with the hedonic premise, which is that what's ideal is to maximize our possible pleasure. Then, we have at our disposal an experience machine, a virtual reality machine that allows us to experience the most pleasurable life we can imagine, in an indistinguishable sensory simulation of real life. Be it my orgies and banquets, or ataraxia. The only catch is, if we choose to plug ourselves in, we can't unplug ourselves until we die. We have to spend our whole lives connected. The logical conclusion would still be to choose the machine. And we should recognize it as the best option for life. And yet, we know it's not in our best interest. Showing us that the initial hedonistic premise is wrong. And that we know that experiencing pleasure is not our ultimate goal as humans. Because, after all, we don't want a machine to live for us, Nozick argues. Well, he proposed this experiment in the 70s. Who, at that time, would have imagined the internet of today? And the abundance of experience machines it offers. I still believe that, deep down, his conclusion stands. And, not to deviate from the subject of shameless examples, although pornography has its uses, its consumption is like junk food. It fills you up, but does not nourish. And once eaten, the aroma of a good steak dinner is not even appetizing. Because there's a difference between a hand and a human. Because we long to be heroes. If you think I disguised this episode with Hindu allegories and philosophical games to preach that you'll get hairy palms, or you'll become cross-eyed by so much vice, I'm not a priest. Nor such a hypocrite. Judging whether Big Macs or Big Milfs are good or bad, I'll leave to them in their pulpit. I'm just saying they're cheap. So cheap, it steals the reward. As easy as if it were given by an experience machine. And we don't want the experience that a machine provides. We want a life to live. But why would we do such a thing? To choose this. To live this life, rather than an artificial existence of pleasure and appearances. For two reasons. Firstly, because we think we're special. For the same reason that young men charge into the battlefield. The hellfire will kill many brothers in arms, but not them. Because lung cancer only afflicts other smokers. And, among the infinite probability of winning the lottery, this time, it's your turn. Because there are certain things that only happen to other people. And there are things that only happen to you. We've got an elevated concept of our cosmic importance. After all, weren't we Brahman? Aren't we God? The whole universe? Yes, and, in a sense, you don't even need Alan Watts to explain it to you. Even if he did. Hear him out. Just by the fact that you exist, sitting on a park bench, you create all the reality that surrounds you. You create birdsongs by sound waves hitting your eardrums. The open book in your hand is heavy by virtue of having muscles. The wood on the bench is rough under your soft skin. You turn rays of light into images, and you create all the visual reality of the park in front of you, through your retinas. Explained like that, reality is relations, and you are an indispensable member of the equation. And subconsciously, you know you're an indispensable condition of the cosmos. Now, the second necessary factor. This is the one that gets us. And it's the most interesting subject in psychology. In my humble opinion. Intersubjectivity. What the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre calls the other's gaze. Let me explain. On the park bench, constructing your reality, Sartre proposes that we consider, now, that a man breaks into our field of vision. The presence of this new element disturbs our notion of ourselves, and of what surrounds us. As Sartre says, the green of the grass turns itself towards the other man, as well as towards you. And some of your universe drains off in his direction. Before, you were a kind of nothingness. Something that built and consumed experiences. And, out of nowhere, this guy appears and looks back, turning you into just another object. Later, in his work, Being and Nothingness, Sartre becomes a peeping Tom. Someone with his ear ironed on a door, with his eye fixed, looking through the keyhole. Spying into the other room. It's not pretty, but imagine that you are that pervert now. With that creepy grin. Completely engrossed in what you hear and observe. And all of a sudden, that same man from the park, walks down the hall, interrupting your peep show. What a bummer. How dare he? How dare he make you aware of who you are? The shame you only feel because you look at yourself through his gaze. The other's gaze. You used to be something free and indefinite. And now, someone comes, and restricts you with their own label of who you are. Giving you shape. And, all of a sudden, you are something. You're somebody. That's what intersubjectivity means. That, just like there's no reality without you. There's no you without the other. Jesus. What a predicament we're in. Obsessed with how special we are. Trapped in other people's recognition. If you disagree, and declare yourself ordinary, then, it's in your averageness where you feel special. The most common person in the world. Even a ghost wants to be recognized for being invisible. If you insist, I don't care what other people think. Then why always the need to announce it aloud? Written on t-shirts and Instagram statuses. Whether arguing with spouses, rioting on the streets, or writing pronouns as a transgender person in Twitter. Everyone shouts the same thing. Look at me. Recognize me as a person. Don't deny me who I am. If you grew up in a large family, you'll know all too well about sibling rivalry. Children bluntly reflect our tragic human need to feel valued. She had a bigger piece of cake. He turned on the television yesterday. Today is my turn. I want to sit in front of the car. Always comparing oneself to the sibling, so as not to feel undervalued, and to always be taken into account. Tirelessly justifying oneself as a being of primary value to the family. And, fortunately, most of us grow up and seek this recognition elsewhere. Through other people and more substantial goals. But they can't seem to satisfy us entirely, can't they? The world away from the cradle is quite dangerous and uncertain. This uncertainty calls for a modicum of security. And we, supposed heroes of our narrative, beg for help. And in the face of the eventual cosmic indifference, we feel cheated, mocked by a cruel universe. So we sacrifice our immediate present for a future that's cured, comfortable, controlled, secure. And really, can anyone blame us for it? So, you want to be an artist, but you need a steady job because you haven't eaten for days. You're in love with this man, but what if you declare your love and he laughs in your face? What if you go out today, and you catch the coronavirus? What can we do about our decaying bodies in the face of our frustrated ambitions? Is sacrificing our heroism for our security the best plan we have? Our great friend, Nietzsche, would shake his head in disappointment at such a cowardly proposal. Nietzsche not only did not believe that pleasure was our end goal, with the exception of the English. He also rejected that survival guided the conduct of things. To him, this world is the will to power, and nothing else. The underlying primordial essence of the universe is an insatiable desire to manifest power, he proclaimed. Friedrich Nietzsche did not mean power in terms of physical strength, nor power to subjugate others. His power is a personal, a psychological, a spiritual one. The will to power means that everything that exists wants to be more than what it is. It wants to grow, overcome itself, even if it doesn't always achieve it. And in us humans, this will haunts us more than anything else. Because both the person who wants pleasure at all hours, and the person who wants to avoid pain through ataraxia, or through the safety of routine, want to avoid the inevitable suffering of being. But they will also long to be heroes due to their elevated sense of grandeur, and the need to be seen. These two sentiments are incompatible. Only the person who recognizes that he wants to be a hero, knowing that that entails suffering and uncertainty, can overcome the tragedy of existence. Because the tragic thing here is not suffering itself, but purposeless suffering. And the individual who answers the calling of heroism, who accepts the will to power that governs the universe, will find usefulness in his suffering. What's more, he needs it. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche said it best. Quote, "The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Send your ships into uncharted seas. Live at war with your peers and yourselves. Be robbers and conquerors, as long as you cannot be rulers and possessors. You seekers of knowledge." Although Nietzsche had a way with words, I'm still beginning to understand what this maxim really means. How to replace the shield with the sword. Because there is no knowing without discovering. And only the previously ignorant learns. I'd go further. If you pray for courage, seek terrifying situations. If you want patience, you'll find it in the middle of a highway, congested with traffic. Because, if you want to build a cathedral, don't ask the Pope how it's done, fraternize with the builders. Because you have to get your hands dirty. Because gold is found underneath the dirt. And so is heroism. Whether they're personal heroics, such as abstaining from substances, or becoming a party animal, or large-scale heroisms, such as being the best mother you can be, or declaring yourself the dictator of a nation. As a last example, to top it off, I will link this radical vulnerability with the notion of romantic love. For the heroic could be verbalized in another way, not as our impulse to love, but of being loved. What's romantic love if not to jump without a parachute? It's an act of faith. A totally crazy thing to do, surrendering to someone else. Literally and figuratively undressing in front of someone else, in the hope that it will be reciprocal. It's the only socially condoned madness. Abandoning control in such a vulnerable way is considered insanity in any other context. But the secret is that behind madness lies sanity, life, love, and a dream, worthy of a god. Playing he isn't so.